human movement is a complex problem, not a complicated problem. So the most optimal way to think about it is more like a gardener and not an engineer. The physical practices and the mental practices or the spiritual practices, I don't think are separate things that you need to do. The more you can combine those together, the more they're going to carry over into helping you in all different aspects. Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences in strength, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I'm Michael Kurkowski, host of the Strength Connection, and I'm so grateful that you can join me today. So in these episodes, I connect with some of the most inspiring and successful individuals to chop it up and learn from true life experiences that have helped them become who they are, the strongest versions of themselves. One of the greatest ways I've always learned the most important lessons is through stories. We all have them, and they make us who we are. So let's dive in. Here we go. All right. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kurkowski. Thank you so much for joining me. It's me and you today. This is a solo episode, middle of July. Hopefully you're doing great on your end. And yeah, I'm pumped to chat about this because what I want to dive into today is something that has been so powerful to me over the past year. But it's also been a little bit of an apprehension to speak about it more. I've written about it a lot, and it's been one of the catalysts that has really propelled my strength in my life to another degree, specifically in the last year. But for some reason, it's been a little more nerve-wracking to speak about it. But I feel like it's time, and I want to dive into it more, specifically from just what it's done with my life and also a lot of the conversations that I've had and how it's gelled within those as well. So that's what I'm going to be going into today with you. First, I want to recap something specific from the episode I did with Rafe Kelley that was released earlier this week. If you haven't had a chance to listen to this episode, I want to give a little context behind it because Rafe brought up an analogy and a distinction between complex versus complicated that was really powerful. So in this episode, it's called Evolve, Move, Play. Rafe is one of the pioneers of parkour training in the world. He started the first West Coast gym, Parkour Visions, which was the first one of this modality years ago, and he was the operator of that till eventually leading him into founding Evolve, Move, Play, which is a parkour system, but goes really into the natural world, going outside and really exploring nature at the same time. And I got connected with Rafe through a mutual friend, and diving into who he was and some of the podcasts he's done and just the work that he's been involved with was absolutely fascinating. He was recently on Jordan Peterson's podcast and John Vervaeke's podcast, two huge platforms, talking about the importance of play in our lives, specifically for children, but also as adults as well. And talking with him, got a chance to dive into his past, into his history, and what eventually led him into doing the work that he does now. And I asked him a question that led into this really interesting topic that he brought up, because he was into gymnastics. He was coaching gymnastics for a while and then was introduced to parkour. And he said that both of the modalities, they're very similar in many ways. It's, stunt driven. It's very high risk things, but a lot of the movements, a lot of the different training that you do is similar. So I asked him, what was it about parkour that spoke to him differently or fascinated him that he wanted to stop gymnastics? If things were similar, what are the differentiations between the two that made him feel so strongly to open up a brand new gym that no one else has really done before, eventually leading into the work he does with Evolve, Move, Play? And he talked about the difference between complicated and complex. And the quote he used was, human movement is a complex problem, not a complicated problem. So the most optimal way to think about it is more like a gardener and not an engineer. And as he explained this, he said that gymnastics is much more like an engineer, where it's one specific problem you're trying to solve. So there's a stunt, there's something that you're doing on, the beam or on the vault, whatever it is. And it's complicated. You need to practice it a lot. You need to get the repetitions and learn it and own it. but essentially you're trying to achieve one specific thing that you know you're trying to accomplish. Where something that's complex is you don't know the exact end result. There could be numerous different ways that you arrive at the solution.
We'll get right back to this episode, but first I want to tell you about Nabosu Technology. Nabosu is the leading company in foot care products created by the top functional podiatrist and human movement specialist, Dr. Emily Splickle and her team. Our feet are a connection to the earth and the foundation of all human movement, and it's often the most overlooked part of our body when it comes to health, fitness, and recovery. Personally, I never thought much of how the foot impacts my movement and strength until years ago when I found my intense sciatic pain I was dealing with was coming from a locked up midfoot and ankle issue. So after putting emphasis on this, my pain subsided completely. And since then, I've made sure to take care of my feet before anything else in training. I use the Nabosu NeuroBall every day, whether I'm training or not, and I felt significantly better in both my barefoot strength training as well as running outside on grass and on pavement. Nabosu has the best products on the market, including the NeuroBall, recovery socks, splays, activation insoles, and the kinesis boards and mats. So to check out Nabosu Technology, click on the link in the comments or go to nabosutechnology.com and use the code CONNECTION and get an additional 10% off your purchase. Again, that's the code CONNECTION. Use it to get 10% off. All right, now let's get back to it.
So that's why he said it's more like a gardener, and that's what parkour is. And some of the different analogies he used, like complicated, is like sending a rocket into space. It's a lot of engineering, it's a lot of math, it's a lot of problems that you need to solve. But eventually you know where you're going to. You know you're going to arrive at solving this problem of breaking through the Earth's barrier and getting into space. Where complex is more like chess. You know, the amount of different ways based on different movements that you can win or lose a game of chess is about the same number of ways as total electrons there are in the universe. So it's much more complex. And I thought the way that he described this in regards to human movement was absolutely perfect. And there's a lot of similarities of what he was talking about that I've done with structure versus intuition. And it's one of the themes that I've talked about numerous times on the podcast. And I thought it was a beautiful way of describing it, where structure, it's important, but it's more like thinking like an engineer. You need to understand that knowledge base in order to build a base, but eventually you need to switch that thinking up and think more like a gardener. And that's when intuition, that's where creativity comes in more. So you have an idea of where you're going, but you're allowing a little bit more freedom inside that movement. So I thought there was so many parallels from what he was talking about with his work in parkour and the difference between that structure versus intuition. So I love that he brought this up, and it was something we dove into more on this episode. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, please, I urge you to go back and check that out. So I really appreciate Rafe jumping on. It was one of my really favorite conversations that I've had with Rafe, because not only is he such a practitioner of this, but he is an incredible historian of human movement, understanding just all different lineages of how we got to all the work that we do now with movement. So it was really awesome. All right, so moving on. I've pondered how to kind of go about this, of talking about this. So I pretty much just wanted to just bring this up in a general term. One of the big things that has impacted me so much is my studying and practicing the wisdom in the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So I've spoken about this a couple different times. I've brought it up in different conversations on the podcast before, but never as like a specific topic as much. I was much more comfortable doing it in a writing term for a while. I've done my weekend Tao, where I've written about it once a week in my email newsletter on it for almost a year now. But speaking of it was always a little bit more nerve-wracking. With writing, you have a little bit more time to sit back and, get your words right on it. Where speaking, it needs to be clear in your mind. And why the hesitancy, I guess, is probably in some ways maybe imposter syndrome or lack of authority. It comes out, there's so many great people that I've listened to and I've studied who are so articulate in their mastery of the Tao. That I was like, who am I to speak about this? But in reality, the main mission I've always had about doing solo podcasts is I just want to speak truthfully about the things that have benefited me the most, the things that I've learned, and also the things that I've struggled with, because all those things are very similar to probably you and the things that you're going through in your life. And the Tao has been the one thing that has aligned with me most over the past year, not just in studying it and journaling about it, but actually bringing it into my strength training practices and actual physical movement. And I want to speak about that a little bit today. Okay. So personally, I've always had an interest myself in theology and religion and spirituality for quite some time. It was never something that I was brought up with. I was raised by two parents who were agnostic. They didn't have great experiences in organized religion, so they chose not to raise me and my sister that way, which was absolutely fine. We had a great childhood and we had great morals and values that we were brought up with. But this question always seemed like, personally for me, was something I wanted to dive into more. And I've studied and read a lot of different texts and philosophies before, but the Tao is the one that was closest and most aligned with me, and for probably numerous ways. I mean, one, it's not dogmatic. It's very open in interpretation. Lao Tzu, who wrote this 2,500 years ago, used nature as a huge example of it. By studying and being in nature, he came about these 81 verses. And it was actually not 81 verses at the time. It was broken up at some point in history. But there's an old cliche of it. It takes an afternoon to read. It's very, very short, but it takes a lifetime to understand. So it's something that you can take a verse and really study it and ponder it and bring it into your practice and see how it resonates with you. And that's where I've seen the biggest impact. I recently just finished reading Dr. Wayne Dyer's book. It's called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, which the first time I saw it, I was like, this is such a corny title. It's so self-helpy that I almost steered away from it. But it's the wisdom inside that book is incredible. The whole book is him taking a year of studying the Tao and researching it and taking each verse and then breaking it down into his own personal thoughts and other translations or other scholars that he found, and bringing their wisdom into what that verse means. And that at the end of each of the chapters is a specific practice that you can work with. And I just finished this book, and the way that he curated this info and articulated it spoke a lot to me. And that's why I wanted to really dive in and speak about it, because one, every time that I've studied the Tao over the past year, my day has been better. Training has been more focused. I've gotten stronger. I've gotten less tweaks and injuries. My communication, my conversations have been stronger. I've been more in flow throughout the day. Everybody knows that feeling of flow. You've probably felt it yourself. And when you find it and you're in it, it is such an amazing feeling. And I found that more and more, and not just specific practices, but just throughout my whole day. And I know one of the major reasons is because of my studying and my writing about and my looking into the works of the Tao. So that's what I'm going to be doing just consistently going forward with this podcast. I don't have a specific thing as far as I'm going to be doing a verse by verse each week or anything like that. I'm not putting any specific constraints on myself of what I have to do. What I did want to do just with this podcast is to say that this has been one of the biggest impacts in my strength, in my life, and in all the works that I'm doing. It's been a catalyst of my strength training, and bringing these verses, bringing these messages into my physical practice has been a really powerful tool for me. And what I've spoken about a lot on the theme in this podcast is the physical practices and the mental practices or the spiritual practices, I don't think are separate things that you need to do. The more you can combine those together, the more they're going to carry over into helping you in all different aspects of your life. So that's why I've said, I don't think just meditation is a great thing. I don't think just strength training is a great thing. I think taking the work that you do in meditation into your physical practice, or taking your spiritual messages into your physical practice, all these different things, working them together, that's going to give you the most impact. And it's all those are the like legs of a tripod. Like they all need to work together in order to have a strong stand. And that's why I wanted to bring this up today. So there's more I'm going to be talking about this, the more I'm going to be diving into it. I'm excited about it. But also at the same time, it is a little bit nerve wracking because it's something, one, that's very personal to me. And two, I want to make sure that I'm doing, my best job of articulating this messages out. So with that, I'll leave it be there. If you've studied the Tao Te Ching before and it's been an impact on you, I'd love to hear your experiences about it. What are the big verses or what are the big messages that have helped you out? If you haven't, I urge you to grab a copy of it and, just start kind of thumbing through it. Like I said, it's an old cliche. It takes an afternoon to read, but it takes a lifetime to understand. So, yeah, I'm excited about it. All right, I'll leave you be from there. As always, though, much love to you. So grateful that you support this podcast and that you're listening. And I hope it keeps continuing to be a great value to you. All right, much love. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait, go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.